AITA for getting angry because my husband and his mother hid that she spent money on expensive things for herself and now expect me to support her financially. Hi everyone. My name is Emily, I am 30 years old, and I have been married to my husband, Jake, who is 32, for almost 4 years now. Overall, I would describe our relationship as solid. We have had our ups and downs like any couple, but we always found our way back to each other. At least, that is what I thought. Something happened recently that completely shook me to the core and made me question not only my trust in Jake but also in the way we have handled boundaries with his mother, Linda, who is 58. For some background, both Jake and I work full-time jobs. Jake has always made a decent income, and I have always respected him for how hard he works. About 6 months ago, I was promoted at my company and, for the first time, started earning slightly more than him. It was never something that we made a big deal about. We agreed early on in our marriage to pool our money for shared expenses like the mortgage, groceries, and utilities, but otherwise kept our finances separate. I liked having some independence and so did Jake. We never fought about money, and I naively thought that we were on the same page about respecting each other's financial autonomy. Linda, on the other hand, has always had a complicated relationship with money. She loves the finer things in life: designer handbags, luxury skincare, flashy jewelry, expensive vacations to tropical resorts, and for years, she managed to fund her lifestyle through a combination of a decent retirement fund, some inheritance money from her late parents, and what she used to call savvy investments. I never asked too many questions because, frankly, it was not my business. As far as I knew, she was set for life and could afford to treat herself. That illusion came crashing down about a month ago. It started innocently enough. Jake's younger sister, Natalie, who is 27 and does not exactly have a filter, casually mentioned during a family dinner that Linda might be moving in with us soon. I nearly dropped my fork. I tried to stay calm and asked what she meant, and Natalie, looking slightly panicked, said something like, "Oh, I thought you knew," before clamming up and refusing to elaborate. The second we got home, I cornered Jake in the living room and demanded an explanation. At first, he looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then he sighed heavily and confessed. A few weeks earlier, Linda had come to him privately and admitted that she had burned through almost all of her savings. Apparently, she had spent lavishly for years, justifying it to herself by saying that after decades of hard work, she deserved to finally live like a queen. Jake, feeling sorry for her and not wanting to upset me, agreed to keep it from me. He said that Linda was hoping we could support her financially, for a while, until she figured something out. I was stunned. I asked him why he thought it was acceptable to even entertain the idea without talking to me. Jake said he had been scared to bring it up because he knew it would upset me and he wanted to protect me from unnecessary stress. I laughed bitterly at that, telling him that being blindsided like this was 1,000 times more stressful than if he had just been honest from the beginning. I could not believe that not only had he kept something this huge from me, but he had also essentially made plans for my money without my knowledge or consent. The situation only got worse. A few days later, Linda called me directly. She started the conversation with fake sweetness, asking how I was and saying she appreciated everything Jake and I had done for her already. Then she launched into her real agenda. She said, "Since you make more than Jake now, and since we are family, it only makes sense that you would help me out. Family looks after each other." I could not believe what I was hearing. I told her flatly that my money was my own and that I was under no obligation to financially support anyone who had spent irresponsibly. Linda immediately shifted tactics, trying to guilt-trip me by saying that she had spent her life taking care of her children and that now it was time for someone to take care of her. I told her that taking care of someone did not mean funding their designer handbag addiction and that she needed to take responsibility for the choices she had made. She got defensive, accusing me of being cold and selfish. I said that there was nothing selfish about setting boundaries, especially when someone else's reckless behavior threatened my financial stability and future. Linda hung up on me after that. I sat in the living room for a long time after that conversation, just staring at the wall, feeling like my world had tilted off its axis. Jake eventually came home and found me there. He apologized profusely for how he had handled things, admitting that he had panicked and thought he was doing the right thing by trying to shield me. He said he felt caught between two people he loved. I told him that while I understood feeling torn, there was a right way and a wrong way to handle things, and sneaking around behind my back was absolutely the wrong way. Since then, things have been tense. Linda has not backed down. She keeps calling Jake, sometimes crying, sometimes yelling, trying every manipulation tactic she can think of to convince him to change my mind. She even suggested that Jake could borrow money from our joint account without telling me, since what Emily does not know cannot hurt her. Thankfully, Jake shut that down immediately and told me about it, which is probably the only reason I have not packed my bags yet. We have had a lot of hard conversations about what it means to be married, about loyalty, about boundaries with parents. Jake has promised to back me up and not allow Linda to manipulate or pressure us into anything we do not both agree on. Still, I cannot help but feel that something fundamental has shifted between us. Trust, once broken, is not so easy to repair. I know some people will say that family is family and you should help them no matter what. But to me, there is a difference between helping someone who fell on hard times through no fault of their own and enabling someone who lived far beyond their means without a second thought and now expects others to bail them out. So here I am, trying to figure out how to move forward, wondering if I am being too harsh or if standing my ground makes me a terrible person. Am I the asshole for refusing to financially support my husband's mother after her reckless spending, even if it means creating major tension in the family? Update 1. After the initial blow-up, I truly thought that things would settle down. I had made my position clear, Jake had apologized, and I foolishly believed that the message would eventually trickle down to Linda and that she would start sorting out her own mess. I thought that the discomfort in the air during our last phone call would have made it crystal clear that I was not, under any circumstances, a viable financial backup plan for her. But oh, how wrong I was. Instead of backing off, Linda just shifted tactics. She stopped trying to guilt-trip me directly and instead went to work behind the scenes, launching a full-scale emotional campaign against Jake. She started calling him daily, sometimes multiple times a day, always under the pretense of just checking in or catching up. In reality, every conversation was laced with heavily implied accusations and guilt. She would say things like she could not believe her own son would let her struggle, or she would reminisce about all the sacrifices she had made for him growing up, mentioning in a pointed voice how she had given up so much to make sure he had everything he needed. It was all carefully framed so that she never outright demanded anything, but the message was loud and clear: if Jake truly loved her, he would find a way to convince me to change my mind. At first, Jake tried to shield me from it. He would answer her calls privately, take his phone out onto the back porch or into the garage where I could not hear the tone of her voice. But it was not hard to tell something was wrong. He started coming back inside looking frustrated and exhausted, rubbing his temples like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He grew quieter at dinner, distracted during movie nights, more irritable about tiny, stupid things that normally would not have even registered for him. About a week into this slow grind, he finally broke. He sat me down one evening after dinner, his face drawn and miserable. I could see he was gearing up for something, and I instantly felt my stomach twist with dread. He started by saying he understood why I felt the way I did, that he knew Linda's choices were irresponsible and unfair. Then he asked, almost hesitantly, if I would consider helping his mom out with just a small monthly contribution, something minor, something we would barely notice, just until she got back on her feet. I sat there staring at him, feeling my heart harden in a way that scared me a little. I could not believe we were having this conversation again. I asked him if he remembered everything we had talked about. I reminded him, carefully but firmly, that Linda's spending habits had nothing to do with me. I reminded him that every dollar we spent supporting her would be a dollar less for our own future. A future we had talked about and dreamed about together, saving for a better house, starting a family, having some financial breathing room so we could travel or take time off if we needed to. I told him that when Linda chose to drain her savings on luxury vacations and high-end handbags, she had not been thinking about her future. She had been thinking about immediate gratification. And now that the consequences had arrived, it was not my job to sweep in and fix it for her. I was not going to jeopardize everything we had built and planned for because someone else had chosen short-term pleasure over long-term security. Jake looked absolutely crushed when he realized I was not going to budge. He said that he felt caught in the middle, that it was tearing him up to see his mom so desperate. I told him that I understood it was painful. I told him that it sucked. But pain did not change the facts. Pain did not magically transform irresponsible behavior into someone else's obligation. I told him that his mother's desperation was born from her own choices, not ours, and that no amount of guilt would turn her problems into my responsibility. He sat there silently for a long time, staring at the floor, running his hands through his hair like he was trying to physically pull the stress out of his body. I stayed quiet too. I was not going to nag, or plead, or argue. I had said what I needed to say. I had drawn my line in the sand, and I was not stepping over it. Linda had created her own mess. She needed to figure out her own solution. Whether that meant downsizing her lifestyle, getting a part-time job, selling some of her designer things, it was on her, not us. Not me. Jake finally nodded once, so small and defeated that it almost broke my heart. But it was a confirmation. He knew I was right. He knew that no matter how much he loved his mother, sacrificing our future for her mistakes would not solve anything. It would only create new wounds between us that might never fully heal. This was not my responsibility, and deep down, I think he knew it too. Update 2. After I stood firm yet again, I thought, naively, that Linda would finally get the hint. I thought that faced with a united front, Jake's reluctant but growing resolve and my absolute refusal, she would be forced to regroup, rethink, and figure something out on her own. In my mind, it seemed so logical, faced with no other options, surely she would realize that the old strategies of guilt and pressure would no longer work. But if anything, my refusal did not shut things down, it only seemed to pour gasoline on a fire I had not fully realized was raging underneath her surface calm. Linda escalated in a way that blindsided me, in a way I had not quite been prepared for emotionally or mentally. She stopped filtering her manipulations through Jake altogether. She came directly for me. No more hiding behind his good nature or pulling strings in the background. She started calling me outright, brazenly, as if we had some unfinished business that only she and I could resolve. At first it was just once, one call, one voicemail, and I ignored it. I figured whatever she had to say could wait, that ignoring it would send a subtle message that I was not open to private conversations behind Jake's back. I thought it was just a last desperate swipe at trying to guilt me. I could not have been more wrong. The voicemails started piling up. First once a day, then 2, then 3, sometimes even 4 by the time I finished my workday. They were long, rambling, emotionally charged monologues. I would play them on speaker, listening in growing disbelief as Linda detailed how it was my moral obligation to help her, how, when you marry someone, you marry their family, and how, selfish, career-focused women like you will never understand true family loyalty. Her voice would swing wildly between wounded sadness and cold fury, sometimes within the same message. Each word dripped with passive-aggressive bitterness, each sentence carefully crafted to frame herself as the noble, suffering matriarch and me as the cold-hearted outsider who had turned my back on family values. She never once acknowledged her own role in the situation. There was no apology for the years of overspending. No ownership of the choices that led to her financial freefall. To listen to her, you would think this disaster had simply fallen out of the sky, a cruel twist of fate that I was now cruelly choosing to ignore. In her mind, she had built a courtroom where I was on trial, where she was judge, jury, and victim all at once, sentencing me for crimes I had never committed. It became relentless. I would silence my phone during meetings at work, hoping for a few hours of peace, and return to find my screen lit up with missed calls and voicemail notifications. Each new message carried an escalating sense of desperation, anger, or betrayal. She began texting too, sending me long, sprawling paragraphs about the sacrifices she had made for her children, the loneliness she felt now, the ingratitude she was suffering at the hands of the very people she had dedicated her life to. Every time my phone buzzed, it felt like a small shock of electricity straight to my chest. I began dreading even glancing at my notifications. I developed the habit of flipping my phone face down wherever I was, at my desk, at the dinner table, on the nightstand, just so I would not have to see the constant reminders of the emotional siege Linda had launched against me. At home, the tension was thick enough to choke on. It sat in the corners of every room, heavy and unavoidable. Jake noticed immediately, even if he did not know the full scope of what was happening. I became quieter, more withdrawn. Small things that would not normally bother me, a misplaced sock, an unfinished chore, started setting me off in ways that even I found alarming. I hated feeling so on edge in my own home, hated the way Linda's manipulations had infected the very air we breathed. One night after dinner, after yet another tense and silent meal, I reached my breaking point. I sat Jake down in the living room, my heart pounding with frustration and exhaustion. I told him, without sugarcoating anything, that this situation was putting a strain on our marriage in a way that genuinely scared me. I told him that I loved him, that I wanted a future with him, but that I could not and would not live like this, feeling cornered, disrespected, and hounded in my own life by someone who refused to accept boundaries. I told him that if he could not set firm, immovable boundaries with his mother, if he could not make it unequivocally clear that her behavior was unacceptable and that our marriage came first, it would cause serious, lasting problems between us that would not be easily repaired. For a long, agonizing moment, Jake just sat there, staring down at the floor, his face a mask of guilt, sadness, and helplessness. I could see him wrestling internally, torn between the ingrained sense of obligation to his mother and the growing realization that her demands were not only unreasonable but actively destructive. To his credit, he did not get defensive. He did not try to placate me with half-promises or excuses. He did not fall back on old habits of minimizing the problem just to avoid confrontation. Instead, in a low, weary voice, he admitted that things had gotten completely out of control. He said that he had been trying to manage it all by himself, hoping if he juggled carefully enough, the problem would resolve itself without exploding. He said he had thought he was protecting me by handling it alone, but now he realized that in doing so, he had only allowed the situation to metastasize into something far worse. He said, with a kind of raw honesty I had not heard from him in weeks, that he never wanted me to feel like I came second to anyone, not even to his mother. It was the first real moment of clarity between us in what felt like a lifetime. Hearing him say it out loud was like feeling a heavy, invisible weight shift slightly off my chest. We sat there together for a long time after that, speaking quietly but openly about everything, about our dreams, about the future we were trying to build, about how critical it was to protect that future from outside interference, no matter how complicated or painful it might feel in the moment. Jake agreed, without hesitation this time, that we needed to put up firmer, clearer boundaries. He promised that he would have a direct conversation with Linda, that he would make it absolutely clear that continuing to harass me was not only unacceptable but completely counterproductive. He said he would remind her, as often as it took, that she needed to find her own solutions, whether that meant downsizing her living situation, seeking professional financial advice, picking up part-time work if needed, but that leaning on us financially was not, and would never be, the answer. For the first time in weeks, I felt the smallest spark of hope flicker back to life inside me. It did not erase the hurt or the stress of what Linda had put us through. It did not erase the fact that rebuilding the trust between Jake and me would take time and careful work. But it gave me hope that we could move through this together, stronger rather than broken. I knew it would not be an easy road. I knew Linda was unlikely to take rejection gracefully. But for the first time, I also knew that Jake and I were drawing the line together, shoulder to shoulder. And that made all the difference in the world. Thankfully, he seemed to realize how far things had gone and agreed that Linda needed to find other solutions, not just lean on us. Update 3. After all the drama, the endless phone calls, the voicemails dripping with guilt and resentment, and the intense conversations between Jake and me, we decided that enough was enough. We needed a final, definitive conversation where everything would be put on the table. No more private whispers, no more triangulating through Jake. If this was going to be resolved, it had to be done face to face, with no room for confusion. We set up a family meeting. It would be Jake, me, Linda, and Jake's younger sister Megan, the one who had accidentally let the secret slip in the first place. I think she felt a little guilty for starting the unraveling, even though none of this was really her fault, and she wanted to be there to support us. The day of the meeting, I felt physically tense, like my body knew this was a final battle. We gathered in our living room, and for a few minutes there was just awkward, heavy silence. Linda looked exhausted, stressed, but also guarded, like she still believed she could argue her way into getting what she wanted. Jake sat next to me, his knee bouncing slightly, Megan perched nervously on the edge of the chair. I started. I did not raise my voice. I did not get emotional. I laid everything out calmly but firmly. I told Linda that while I sympathized with how difficult her situation must feel, I was not going to pay for her lifestyle. I told her that spending recklessly for years without a plan for the future had consequences, and those consequences were hers to face, not ours to shoulder. I explained that Jake and I had our own goals, our own dreams, and our own financial responsibilities. We could not sacrifice our stability because she had not thought ahead. I suggested several paths she could pursue: downsizing to a smaller apartment or condo, finding part-time work to supplement her income, speaking to a financial advisor who could help her create a sustainable plan moving forward. I made it crystal clear that while we were willing to offer emotional support and guidance, we were not going to be her financial crutch. To my surprise, Megan spoke up too. She said she loved their mother, but it was not fair to expect Jake and me, especially as we were trying to build our own future, to pick up the pieces of bad decisions we had no part in. She told Linda bluntly that if she continued to expect handouts, she would drive a wedge between herself and her children, and no amount of guilt-tripping would change that. At first, Linda cried. She sobbed into her hands about how abandoned she felt, about how she had given everything to her family, only to be left alone now that she needed help. It was heartbreaking to watch, but even as she wept, I stayed firm. I had learned too much through this whole ordeal to be pulled back into the trap of guilt. She kept looking at Jake, pleading silently with her eyes for him to swoop in and fix everything, but he did not. For the first time, Jake stood his ground with me. He told her gently but firmly that he loved her, but that our future had to come first. He said that he wanted her to succeed, to find stability, but that it could not come at the cost of his marriage or his own life plans. It took a while, but slowly Linda seemed to realize that no amount of crying, no amount of appeals to family loyalty, no amount of shifting the blame would change our stance. She was met with a wall of quiet but unshakable boundaries, and after a long, heavy silence, she finally stopped fighting. We did agree, as a gesture of good faith, to help her with a one-time sum of money, not enough to fund a lavish lifestyle, but enough to give her a safety cushion while she got her situation sorted out. We made it clear this was a one-time thing. No strings attached, but also no repeats. It has been a few weeks since that meeting, and things have calmed down dramatically. Linda has accepted, at least outwardly, that she needs to be more responsible. She said she would spend the money more wisely this time, and so far, she seems to be making better choices. She is not thrilled with me, that much is obvious. There is a coolness in her tone now, a polite distance that did not used to be there. But honestly, I do not care. Setting boundaries is not cruel. It is not selfish. It is necessary. Allowing someone else's poor decisions to dictate my life would have been the real betrayal, to myself, to Jake, and to the life we are building together. It would have created a cycle of resentment and obligation that could have poisoned everything we have worked so hard for. I am proud that I stood my ground. Proud that I refused to let emotional manipulation twist my sense of right and wrong. Proud that Jake and I ultimately faced it together, as a team. And proud that, even though it was hard, we chose the harder but healthier path. So, am I the asshole for getting angry and refusing to support her? Honestly, after everything, I do not think so.